In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to hash passwords. For that, we're going to use a very popular library called bcrypt. So here in the terminal, let's install bcrypt. So note the version that I'm using. That's version 1.0.3. Now here I'm going to create a playground file. So you learn how to work with this bcrypt library, and then we're going to take that code and put it in a route for hashing the password of new users. So let's create a new file, hash.js. In this file, first we need to load bcrypt. This returns an object. We store it here, bcrypt. Now, to hash a password, we need a salt. What is a salt? Well, imagine our password is 1234. When we hash that, let's imagine we will get a string like this. Now, this hashing algorithm is one way. So if we have ABCD, we cannot decrypt this and get 1234. So from a security point of view, that's great. If a hacker looks at our database, he or she cannot decrypt these hash passwords. However, they can compile a list of popular passwords and hash them. And then they can look at the database of our application. They find this hash password and they know that ABCD represents 1234. So that's why we need a salt. A salt is basically a random string that is added before or after this password. So the resulting hash password will be different each time based on the salt that is used. Okay, let me show you this in action. So here we call bcrypt.gen_salt. Note that this method has two versions. The first one is asynchronous, the second one is synchronous. As a best practice, you should always use asynchronous methods because, as I told you at the beginning of the course, in Node applications we have a single thread. We don't want to keep that thread busy because then we can't serve other clients. So we call gen_salt. As an argument, we pass the number of rounds we want to run this algorithm to generate the salt. The higher the number, the longer it's going to take to generate the salt, and also the salt will be more complex and harder to break. So the default value is 10, we're going to use that. Now, because this is an asynchronous method, we can either pass a callback here, and that's what you see in their official documentation, as well as a lot of tutorials on the web. But this method also has an overload that returns a promise. So instead of passing a callback, we get a promise, await it, and then get the salt. So now we need to wrap this in an async function like run. Okay, so let's log the salt on the console. And finally, let's call this run function. Now, back in the terminal, node hash.js. So this is an example of a salt. You can see the number of rounds we used included in the salt. So if we use 20, here instead of 10, we would have 20. So here we have a long random string that is included as part of hashing our password. And with this, every time we hash our password with a new salt, we get different result. So now that we have a salt, we can use this to hash our password. We have another method here on this bcrypt object that is hash. So we give it our data. Let's imagine our password is 1234. We give it the salt. And again, look, the third argument can be a callback. We're not going to use this. Instead, we're going to get the promise that is returned from this method. So we await that promise and get the hashed password. So now let's log this on the console as well. Hashed. Okay, back in the terminal, node hash.js. Okay, look, on the first line we have our salt. On the second line, you can see the salt here as well. So the salt is included in the hash password. The reason this is included is because later, when we want to authenticate the user, we want to validate their username and password. So there the user sends the password in plain text. We need to hash it again but we need to have the original salt that was used to generate this hash. So during comparing the plain text password with the hash password, bcrypt needs to know the original salt that was used to hash this password. So now that you know how bcrypt works, let's take these two lines and put them in our route handler. So cut from here. Let's go to users.js. Okay, here's our user object. Let's paste those lines here. So we generate a salt, and then we need to hash the password. Instead of 1234, we're going to use user.password. That's the plain text password. So we hash it with the salt and then reset it. So user.password here. And finally, save the user to the database. Now on the top, we also need to import bcrypt. So constant bcrypt, we set this to require bcrypt. Now here in Compass, I want to delete the users collection because all the users we have so far, they have plain text password. So delete. All right, now back in the terminal, let's run nodemon. Okay. And then here in Postman, we're going to send a new request. Send. Beautiful. So here we have a new user. Now back in Compass, let's refresh this list. We have the users collection. And here's our new user with a hashed password. Beautiful. So we have implemented this endpoint to register new users. We're done here. Next, we're going to look at authenticating users.